Okay, so we're in the middle of chapter 17, as mentioned in the Tanya year, and it continues to speak obviously about the Benoni, which is the level that we can and should all reach, the level of the person that can be in full control of his animal soul in the three realms that we function in, our thought, our speech, and our action. This chapter also tries to almost decipher how to deal with the animal soul, to understand animal soul, and then therefore how to deal with it and eventually control it. That should be the goal. We spoke about how last week we spoke about how there are two stages of growth, of teshuvah, of returning. First stage must be to snap out. If someone, God forbid, fell into the abyss of sin, then the first thing you have to do is jump out, because we're not emotionally equipped or mentally equipped or even spiritually equipped to deal with the sin itself. So we jump out and we continue to build and continue to grow and continue to advance. And only after a while do we go back and then try and understand what we could have learned from the sin and how really it was a part of our journey. As we said, Yagata umatzata tamin, the one who searches and finds, is the one that can be believed. But it comes to say also that sometimes the sin is part of the search. Not sometimes. It's actually, as we said, it's part of the mitzvah itself, of the mitzvah of repenting. Anyway, that's really in just a few lines what we studied about last week. But let's continue here, middle of page 89. There I add that this coming Monday night and Tuesday and then Wednesday is considered to be a holiday among Hasidic Jews of every color. And that is because on this day, the author of the Tanya that we're studying, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, was released from a Soviet jail after being sentenced to death. And this was considered to be a day, therefore, of redemption, not just for him, but for anyone who's connected to him through his teachings. Because what happens here below is reflective of what happens above, according to Kabbalah. And maybe above, there were some forces who tried to say that the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, that these Hasidic rabbis should not be teaching their Hasidic thoughts. And maybe this is also why, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he ended up in jail, almost as a sign, hey, stop teaching these innermost teachings of the Torah. But when he was released, it was also a sign that not only should he continue to teach, but he should do so with even more fervor and passion than ever before. So anyway, so on Monday night and Tuesday is the day which we mark his release from jail. And therefore, it's a day of celebration, because that's when we began to have access to the teachings that we are studying right now. So let's keep that in mind as we continue to study the Tanya. Middle of page 89. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
I'll do it if nobody else wants to. Okay.
Yes, please.
This is the category of lower repentance. A tormented heart, unable to bear the excruciating pain any longer, is the path to this teshuvah, repentance, return, whereby the lower letter, hey, is raised up from its fall into the forces of evil. The tetragrammaton, spelled yud-hey, expresses the drawing down from the yud, hinting at the primary source in Chochmah, to the last hey, indicating Malkut, kingship, the Shekhinah. The lower hey, the Shekhinah, fell as a result of the man's misdeeds and is torn from its connection to the tetragrammaton, from its attachment to the source of life in the yud of the name. Nevertheless, when a person's heart is broken within, the reign of impurity that dominated him also shatters. At that juncture, it becomes possible to repent and to restore one's divine spark. That portion of the Shekhinah, the lower hay within him, to its place in the name, reattached to the supernal holiness. In this sense, teshuvah is not only an individual affair, a return to one's proper state. It is rather a return of the Shekhinah itself, that man had pulled down and humiliated within his own nefesh. By his repentance, The Shekhinah is restored to its heights.
Right. So let's just explain this for a little bit before we proceed on page 90. So in every one of us, there's a soul, which, as the Tanya says, is really a part of God. Now, therefore, wherever we walk, whatever we do, we're walking not just alone, but we're walking with God, with a piece of God. That's again a part of us. It's here within us in our very own being. Now, therefore, when we sin, a part of God is forced to go down to those impure and low levels of sin. The Tanya in different place gives a very shocking analogy to this, and it says it's almost like taking the face of God and dumping it down a toilet, um, because again, when we sin, we're not just sinning with with our hand or with our eyes or whatever part of the body we may be using, but we're sinning with our soul too. Our soul is being forced into this toilet. And now, kabbalistically, what is happening, as the Tanya explains here, is that this piece of God, which is really represented by those four letters Yud Hey and Yud Hey, is now being thrown down to this toilet, so to speak, and therefore the Hey now is not in the place that it should be, the place of divinity, the place of goodness, because you threw it into the abyss of sin. So when a person returns and understands that he has to snap out of the sin, as we were speaking about before, then what happens is that hay that was now in the toilet is being returned to its proper divine state where it is supposed to be all the time. You bring back the hay that is that Shekhinah, the divine presence, to the divine itself, to the divine realm itself. You rescuing it from the toilet that it was sent in, that was forced to be through this sin. Hope that explains this. It's a shocking analogy, but it really makes us visualize what this is about. And so we can take it, I just have to add, in a negative way or in a positive way. We can say, oh gosh, I'm terrible. Sometimes I do bring the hay down to the toilet. How can I be insulting God like this? But on the other hand, the positive side of this is that it teaches us that no matter where we are, we're not alone. We really are not alone. God is with us. We have a hay with us. And that hay is always there to strengthen us, to fortify us, to give us the tools not to fall into the abyss of sin, to overcome any challenge that we may be facing. Because deep within us, we have a piece of God that is not fazed by this world, not fazed by any limits. It's limitless. So that's another perspective to this, as strong as this analogy may be. We learned this in this week's portion just yesterday. We read how Vayivater Yaakov levado, that Jacob was left all by himself when he went back to get a few pots, according to Rashi, in the middle of the night, as his family was journeying to Israel. He went back on his way, and there the angel of Esau met him. Who it was exactly is also left to the commentaries, but met him in order to wrestle with him all night long. We just read this yesterday. But the way the Torah introduces the story is that Jacob was left alone. Vayivater Yaakov levado. Now, the word for alone, as the Kabbalists point out, is an interesting word because levad in Hebrew does not just mean alone, but levad means to your being. Le bad. Bad is the being. And it really comes to teach us that when we're alone, all we have to do is to open up our eyes to see what is attached to our being. Le, to, vad, to you. And when we realize that Yud Hey Vav Hey, Yud Hey and Yud Hey, as we said, the telegram, is attached to us, that we're not alone, that God is with us, then when we feel alone, we'll realize that we are really not alone, and that in of itself will fortify us. That's what the word levad really means. To you is attached the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So wherever you are, you're really never alone. It's interesting because the other word that is used for loneliness, and there's a difference between loneliness and alone, is badad. It's a word that is used in modern Hebrew, but it's also a word in the Bible, in divine Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, as they call it. Yoshev badad v'idom. We read that on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, the saddest day of the year. We read the Book of Lamentations, and then that word is used a few times, badad. Now, badad is the same word as levad, just without the lamed. And therein lies the difference between lonely, badad, and levad, alone, which is what we read in yesterday's portion. Badad, you don't realize that there's a lamed. You're lonely because you don't realize that God is with you. Levad, which is how Jacob felt when he was alone, is not lonely. It's alone. When you're alone, you realize that there's someone with you, and therefore you're alone. You don't fall into this curse of loneliness. You know that you might be physically alone, but God is with you, and therefore you really are not alone. It's the lamed that is attached to you. And that's the difference in the Hebrew between lonely, badad, which is the same word as alone, just alone has a lamed attached to it, levad. Vad and badad are the same words, just alone. The person who feels alone knows that God is with him. So even when we are all by ourselves, we should know that we are not lonely. We're not badad, but we are alone. If you're badad, then you're in the Book of Lamentations. Then you fall into this depression. But if you levad, then you're with Jacob fighting this angel and overcoming him, because you know that the Shekhinah is with you. And this is exactly what this is saying, that God is with you no matter what. Therefore, if you sin, you are bringing God with you to that toilet. But remember, you're never alone. You're never lonely, sorry. Never lonely. Might be alone, but alone with the divine presence. So that's the positive way of looking at what was just said. But again, I don't want to be the only one speaking, so feel free to share your thoughts or disagreements. Otherwise, we can continue. Okay, let's continue.
Okay.
Please.
Which is the mystery of the Shekhinah in exile, as our rabbis of blessed memory state. When they, the Israelites, were exiled into Edom, the Shekhinah went with them. That is to say, when a person practices the acts of Edom. Shifting from the general perspective that spans the entire world to the specific, the exile of the Shekhinah also applies to each individual. When a Jew performs an Edomite action, he himself becomes Edom, Ishmael, or any other entity that is not part of his essential nature. He is no longer himself. He does not have to physically go forth to the land of Edom to go into exile there. He has brought Edom into his own being and internalized it. And this is not all. The divine presence goes into exile as well.
Right, which is a very powerful line from the Talmud, Galula Edom Shechinai Mahem, that we were exiled to Edom, which is not just, as the Tanya says, a physical place, but it is really also a spiritual place. Sometimes we go into those toilets, so to speak, again, to use that analogy, Edom, the darker parts of our world. We should know that God is not, that God is there with us, that we are not there alone. We see that, I think, in our day and age, in our generation, we were exposed to this more than maybe most generations in Jewish history. How? Through the hostages that came back from Edom, from the depths of captivity, and in an amazing way, even though, most of them did not necessarily have any, religious background, but all of them, common denominator, all of them, was that they all shared that they knew that they were not alone. They were in Edom, but they felt God. Elia Cohen told me that every day he would practice wearing tefillin, even though, of course, he didn't have tefillin. And he didn't wear tefillin every day before captivity. But in captivity, he knew that God was with him. So he practiced. He went to the corner every day and he would act as if he's wearing tefillin and then say the Shema, because he knew that God was there with him. And that's what gave him the strength to survive. And this is the story of Elia Cohen. But if you go to the stories of these just holy heroes, then you'll see that they really internalized this teaching. Shekhinah was with them. They felt the Shekhinah and they were fortified by it. They were strengthened by it. We have endless examples of this in our generation. These are words that really have come alive. And thank God none of us are in those types of situations in which we find ourselves in tunnels surrounded by people who want to murder us. But we find ourselves in other types of tunnels. And even then, we have to know that Shekhinah imahem, the Shekhinah is with us. And therefore, we have all the tools, all the strength really to overcome whatever challenge, whatever tunnel we may be facing. You know, I've said this before, but here's another Hebrew word. The Hebrew language is just so powerful in that way. And that is that the word for tunnel in Hebrew is light. So a word for tunnel, but it also means light. Minhara comes from the word nahor, which means light. Which means that even if we're in a tunnel in a dome, we still have light. And the light that we have is the light of God. And that light should really lift us up. Should teach us that we're not alone in this exile. And that God is with us, He's paining with us, and He's suffering with us, but He's also giving us all the strength so that we can come out of it together with Him.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have to say that many who pray and who are emotionally spiritual, even with those beliefs, they perished.
No doubt.
So the one example that you give, or two examples that you give, I think of my grandparents who were Hasidim who did not survive.
Absolutely. But I'm not talking about the survival, whether they survived or not. And you're right, in the Holocaust, millions did not survive. But they still were fortified by this thought that they're holding onto God. They're holding onto His.
But I'm saying it didn't help.
Faith. So even when they were killed, they still were killed with God, so to speak, with that awareness, with that consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah. I knew a Holocaust survivor. I'm not sure if he's still alive, but I remember when I was a teenager, he lived not far away from our high school yeshiva, and Zalman was his name. I hope he's still alive. But I remember that he told us that in his barrack, it was in Buchenwald, that every single day they would have a secret prayer, and the Jews that had never prayed before would come and pray with him. And, the time changed based on when the Nazi officers were there or not, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, as he said. Now, he said many of them did not survive. But still, the fact that they were there and were aware of this gave them the strength for that day, So, yeah. Look, it's interesting because, again, I'm going to go to the Hebrew here. So we spoke about minhara, light, which also means tunnel, which also means light. But let's just focus on what we have here, Edom. Galul Edom Shechinah imahem. That God says to us that when you go to Edom, even the spiritual Edoms, I'll be there with you. Shekhinah, the Shekhinah will be there with you. Edom in Hebrew really is the Edomites. Esav, the descendants of Esav. Esav was called Edom. Esav hu Edom. We just read this also in the portion. Now, all the descendants of Esav, Amalek is considered Edom. Haman from the Purim story is Edom. So these were people who were part of a specific lineage. Now, what's interesting is that Edom also is a combination of two words in Hebrew. You have Aleph and Dom. Dom means complete silence. Dmama, Dom, means silence. Now, Dom also means blood. Dam comes from the word Dom, which means blood. And what God is saying is that I'm going to take my letter, Aleph. Aleph is one of the letters of God because Aleph is the numerical value of 1. And there's one God. And I'm going to bring it to your silence, and I'm going to bring it to your blood, to your suffering. And if you can open up your eyes to this Aleph in the Dom, or in the dam, in the silence, or in the blood, then you'll see that the Shekhinah is with you. Now, hopefully, and please God, none of us will ever have to experience any type of silence or any type of blood, but the Aleph is always there. And that in of itself, I think, is what gives us the strength on a personal level, because remember, the context is sin. It's not tunnels and all that we're speaking about. We just expanded the thought here. But all that should give us the strength and the thought, really, to not to fall into the small little sins of the day, the little slips of the day, the failures of the day, if you want to call them that way. Okay. Thank you for that, William. Please, anyone else, feel free to share your ideas too. Otherwise, we'll continue.
The Romans were also considered Edom.
That's right. The Romans were considered descendants of that lineage, yeah. You know, it's a whole different discussion, but many people ask, who is Edom today? Who are the Edoms today? I'm not going to go there. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue unless someone else wants to speak up. Okay.
Okay.
Please. He degrades and brings down. Let's continue here.
Yes, he degrades and brings down thither the divine spark, which vitalizes his nefesh, ruach, and neshama, that are clothed within him in the animal soul of the klipa, which is in the left part of his heart, which reigns over him as long as he remains wicked, dominating his small city. When one transgresses, not only his body is involved, his supernal nefesh, ruach, and neshama are also dragged down into the sin, thus drawing to himself the klipa.
Right. So when we go down to those sins and to those toilets, as the analogy goes, then we are contaminating basically the holiness in us, the divine being in us, the Yud Hey and the Yud Hey in us becomes tarnished. Now, the tarnish is just external. It can be internal, because internally it's a piece of God that has no limits, that can't be affected by anything. But externally, it's tarnished, and therefore we need the process of teshuvah. Process of teshuvah is really a type of cleansing. It's not just returning to who we are, but through the process of returning, we are getting rid of all those stains from the toilet, just as when we come out of the toilet, we wash our hands. So we get rid of those stains. Now, the deeper the sin, the deeper the stain. But again, the stain is external, so you need sometimes bleach, so to speak, not just washing your hands. But again, it's done through the process of teshuvah. And that process is what cleans our beings from that toilet and restores the Hey, the Shekhinah, where it was supposed to be all along. I'll tell you, I'll share with you something very personal. But when I was about 15, 16, I went to a Hasidic Farbrengen, Hasidic gathering with Rabbi Steinsaltz, who was the main speaker. And I shared with him, I went up to him in one of the breaks, when Hasidic Farbrengens are very special. By the way, we're having one on Tuesday evening. Everyone is welcome for the 19th of Kislev. But basically, you share words, people open up, they become very vulnerable. And in between, there's songs, there's nigunim. But anyway, so in one of the in-between breaks, I went up to Rabbi Steinsaltz and asked him, can I ask you for a personal question? I have a dilemma. And Rabbi Steinsaltz, being the best teacher in the world and as forthright as he was, and that's why I also was very connected with him, says to me, well, right now, I can't speak to you. I said, why? He said, because you have too many flies and bugs in your mind. No matter what I say, it's not going to register. So I said, how do I get rid of my bugs? How do I get rid of my flies? Fine. Because I need an answer. And he said, go and fill your mind with some Torah. Go and fill your mind with some mitzvot. And then the flies will automatically go away because you'll occupy that space in a different way. So I'm saying sometimes we have stains, flies, bugs. So what do we do? Teshuvah, returning to your source, to your resources, to your neshama, is what then occupies the mind instead of other things. And sometimes it doesn't have a process of, taking a brush and scrubbing the stains and putting bleach. It's just turning your mind to a different direction, to filling it with holiness, with light. And that light in and of itself expels the darkness. But that's why Teshuvah again restores us and restores the Hay in us, that Shekhinah that is always with us.